On the 7th of December 1925, people queued at the Banco de Portugal in Lisbon carrying 500 escudo notes. By the end of that first exchange day, according to the next morning's newspaper, 34,800 notes had been handed in. Each bore Vasco da Gama. Each appeared to come from the authorized printer, using the bank's own design. Yet some had entered Portugal without the bank's knowledge, and nobody at the counter could reliably tell which ones. The bank honored both. How can a banknote be fraudulent when its paper, engraving, and printer are all genuine? The answer began not in a cellar with a crude press, but with a set of documents convincing enough to make a respected security printer obey an order that had never been given. Alves Reis began shaping the scheme in the middle of 1924, after an earlier fraud involving companies connected to Angola had failed and put him in prison. By the end of that year, he had forged 2 contracts. One purported to bind him to the High Commissioner of Angola. The other purported to bind that office to the Banco de Portugal. Together, they described a secret financing operation for Angola, then suffering serious economic difficulty. Secrecy was useful because it explained why ordinary confirmation might be unwelcome. The papers did more than ask for money. They created an invented chain of authority, one that seemed to run from a Portuguese colony to the institution entitled to issue Portugal's currency. Reis did not need to imitate a finished note. He needed professionals to mistake forged permission for a lawful command. The target was Waterloo and Sons of London, a major printer of banknotes and securities. Waterloo was not an imitation of the official supplier. It was one of the Banco de Portugal suppliers. Under a contract dated the 27th of November 1922, followed by a repeat order on the 20th of February 1924, the firm had produced 600,500 escudo notes for the bank. They showed Vasco da Gama and were known as Plate 2. Most had entered circulation. Waterloo therefore held the design, the technical knowledge, and access to the printing material. Reis and his associates learned the bank's pattern of series, numbers, and signatures. Their false contract said the new notes were for Angola. That explanation made repeated Portuguese serial numbers appear intentional, because the supposed colonial issue would later be marked for use outside metropolitan Portugal. Waterloo accepted the authority presented through Karel Marang, the Dutch member of the group who dealt with the printer. 200,000 notes were delivered in February and March 1925. The Banco de Portugal knew nothing of the order. Many of those notes then entered Portugal with the protection afforded by diplomatic privileges used by the group. Once inside, they did not have to be passed furtively in shops. The proceeds moved through purchases of foreign currency, deposits, bank transfers, loans, and investments in companies connected to Angola. This was not merely spending, it was conversion. Each ordinary transaction placed distance between the unauthorized issue and the documents that had produced it. Because the notes were professionally printed from official material, routine examination offered no simple warning. The money moved with the confidence of money that had nothing to hide. In April 1925, the group moved to create a commercial and development bank, the Banco Angola e Metra Cubepol, the Banking Commerce Inspection Office, the Banking Council, and the Banco de Portugal gave unfavorable opinions. Even so, the finance minister authorized its formation on the 27th of June, subject to conditions including fully subscribed capital of at least 20 million escudos. The group could satisfy that condition because Waterloo had already delivered notes with a face value of 100 million escudos. The bank opened in early July, built in part on capital that had not come from trade, savings, or productive investment, but from an unauthorized printing order. A private bank gave the operation a public face. It could receive deposits, make transfers, and grant credit at scale. The institution did not merely conceal the notes. It made their abundance look like the consequence of successful banking. At the end of July, Marang placed a second order with Waterloo for another 380,000 notes of the same denomination and design. Those deliveries ran from August through November. In all, the printer supplied 580,000 unauthorized 500 escudo notes. The later House of Lords record found that 490,000 were exact duplicates of notes printed for the Banco de Portugal. To ordinary handling, they were indistinguishable. The differences were minute and depended on production data held by Waterloo, not on obvious errors a cashier could recognize. This scale matters. The common shorthand that Reis ordered 200,000 notes describes only the first issue. The surviving court judgment records both. The second order transformed a successful deception into a threat to the issuer itself. Every new packet increased the chance that 2 notes bearing the same identity would eventually meet. The Banco Angola e Metra Cubepol used its new resources openly. It extended finance and acquired interests in enterprises tied to Angola. In November, the group also began buying shares in the Banco de Portugal, seeking a dominant position in the institution whose notes it had caused to be printed. That purchase has often made the story sound like an attempt to buy the victim before the victim could discover the crime. The public record supports the share buying and the goal of influence, but not the certainty of success. What can be said is already extraordinary. Unauthorized currency had been converted into corporate capital, and part of that capital was now being directed toward the lawful issuer. The scheme was beginning to circle back upon its source. Yet the same scale that made this ambition possible also made the group's banking operations increasingly difficult to explain. Suspicion did not arrive as a single revelation. From October, newspapers questioned the scale of the Banco Angola e Metra Cubed Pol's business and the source of its capital. In November, doubts deepened. On the 19th of November, the finance minister instructed the inspector of banking commerce to investigate. The Lisbon newspaper O Século pursued the bank's unusual operations, while officials focused on the abundance of 500 escudo notes in Porto. Then, on Friday, the 4th of December, the manager of a private Lisbon bank reported suspicious dealings involving the Porto operation to a Banco de Portugal director identified in the English judgment as Dr. Ulrich. Ulrich contacted an assistant criminal investigation judge. That evening, state and bank officials traveled north. The inquiry had begun with behavior, not a defective note. The notes looked right. The institution using so many of them did not. On the 5th of December, police searched the Porto premises of the Banco Angola e Metra Cubed Pol. They found many packets of new 500 escudo notes, but the stacks did not present an easy confession. The serials were not simply consecutive, and the series were mixed. Officials ordered all notes of that type in the Banco de Portugal's Porto branch to be arranged by series. They did the same with 2,000 notes taken from the private bank. The work continued late into Saturday night and into Sunday morning. Then the sorting produced what eyesight alone could not. 4 notes appeared twice, creating 4 duplicate pairs. 8 sheets of apparently valid currency carried only 4 identities. That was conclusive proof. The fraud was not revealed by poor engraving. It was revealed when the records printed on the notes were forced into order. Bank officials returned to Lisbon, and on Sunday evening, the 6th of December, the directors met. They knew unauthorized notes existed, but they did not yet know their full number or a practical way to separate them from lawful notes. The board chose the only workable protection for the currency. It withdrew the entire Plate 2 issue of 500 escudo Vasco da Gama notes. A notice dated the 7th of December instructed holders to exchange them at the Lisbon head office, the Porto branch, and bank agencies. The result was a run, but not a run by depositors demanding reserves. It was a line of people asking whether the money already in their hands still counted. For each note presented, good or unauthorized, the bank initially issued a good note of equal face value. Public confidence was preserved by making the issuer absorb the uncertainty. Waterloo specialists possessed tests that the Banco de Portugal initially did not. They relied on tiny letters and minute differences in spacing, details linked to production information kept by the printer. Sir William Waterloo and 2 directors traveled to Lisbon, arriving on the 13th of December while exchanges continued. The investigation could eventually classify notes more precisely, but the first public decision had been made without that luxury. By the 26th of December, the English judgment later recorded that the bank had issued 209,718 good notes in exchange for unauthorized ones. The Banco de Portugal's Modern Museum account summarizes the direct loss as almost 100 million escudos. These figures count related parts of the same emergency in different ways. The essential fact is not an estimate. The issuer had to honor vast numbers of notes that it had never authorized because refusing them at sight was not yet possible. The scandal moved immediately into politics. From the 14th of December, Portugal's Chamber of Deputies debated the responsibility of the government and the Banco de Portugal, the fate of the Banco Angola e Metra Cubed Pol, and proposals for an inquiry. Those debates continued until Parliament closed after the military coup of the 28th of May 1926. The fraud did not by itself explain the fall of the First Republic. Portugal had endured years of political and monetary instability. A later economic study from the London School of Economics estimated that the 100 million escudos successfully injected equaled about 0.88% of current price gross domestic product and raised high-powered money by roughly 5.9%. Its more cautious conclusion was political. The crisis worsened inflation and damaged the Republic's credibility, increasing the likelihood of rupture without serving as its single cause. The domestic reckoning took years. Investigators examined the accounts of the Banco Angola e Metra Cubed Pol and connected firms, conducted inquiries abroad, and classified the recalled notes. A liquidation commission created in May 1926 recovered more than 43 million escudos by the time its work ended in August 1931. Reis went on trial in Lisbon in 1930. After appeals, he was finally sentenced in August 1931 to 8 years in prison and 12 years of deportation. The gap between discovery and final sentence reflects the scale of the documentary task. This was not a case that could be proved by displaying a crude fake beside a genuine note. The prosecution had to reconstruct authority, deliveries, accounts, ownership, and circulation across borders. The same paper systems that Reis had manipulated became the means by which the operation was reduced to evidence. A second reckoning unfolded in England. In 1928, the Banco de Portugal sued Waterloo and Sons. By the time the case reached the House of Lords, Waterloo accepted that its contract contained an obligation not to print Banco de Portugal notes without the bank's direct authority, and that delivering 580,000 notes to Morong breached that duty. The remaining contest concerned the value of the loss. Was the damage merely the cost of paper and printing, or the purchasing power the bank had issued to replace unauthorized currency? On the 28th of April 1932, the House of Lords entered judgment for the Banco de Portugal for £610,392. The bank's museum records a later agreed compensation total of £697,416. The fraud had exploited the meaning of authorization. The civil case forced another institution to put a price on its absence. Return to the counter in Lisbon. A customer places a 500 escudo note beneath the glass. Vasco da Gama is present. The paper is right. The engraving is right. Only the authority behind it is missing, and that absence cannot be seen without comparing the note to records elsewhere. The surviving record preserves those comparisons. It holds the forged contracts, the printer's deliveries, the bank's notice, the newspaper reports, the liquidator's recoveries, and the judgments in 2 countries. Together they resolve the opening paradox. Reis did not make false money look real. He caused real banknote making to produce money that was not lawfully issued. In December 1925, the difference appeared as 4 repeated serial numbers. A century later, those duplicates still mark the point where confidence became evidence.